Okay, welcome back everyone. This is our corporate finance video class that we're doing now. So I wrote some topics up on the board. I'm slowly figuring out YouTube videos. I just figured out that, well, not figured out today, but yesterday, for whatever reason, when you're making a video on using your iPhone, you can't pause it. It completely threw me off, because yesterday I was talking away and then I pressed stop thinking it was pause, and it was a disaster. So I don't know, like I say, I'm slowly getting used to this again, or not used to it again. I've never done a YouTube video, but I don't know, it's coming along slowly. So let's get into chapter 10. Chapter 10 is it's fairly short. Okay, so we'll be done by Friday. But just some topics for us to go over, and then that'll be it for today. So let's start off with today's topic is dealing with estimating risk and return. Okay, so we're going to look at expected returns, which is on page 290 and 291. Okay, and then we're going to get into risk premiums, okay, which starts on 292 and 293. Okay. So first of all, when we're dealing with an expected return, let's look at some terminology. First, we have a probability. Okay, so what's probability? Well, probability is the likelihood that something's going to happen. All right, so we all like sunny weather, I think, anyway. So there's a 90% probability of clear blue skies tomorrow. Okay, so 90%. Well, then there's a 10% chance of something else, right? It's as simple as that. 40% chance of rain showers. Well, I guess there's a 60% probability or a 60% chance that there's going to be no rain showers. Okay, so again, probability is a fairly straightforward concept. It's just the likelihood of an occurrence. Okay. Now, in this case here, we might have, let's dealing with weather. So weather was a fairly simplistic scenario. Okay, but we're going to get into some things where we see, okay, there's a probability of a return on investment of 20%, okay? There's a probability of a return on investment of 10%, and the likelihood that we're going to get that 20% return on investment is going to be, let me think, 60% chance to get a 20% return on investment. Then there's a 40% chance that we're only going to get a 10% return on investment. Okay, so those are probabilities. Now we take that and we can calculate that into our expected return. Okay, so the expected return is the average of all the possible returns weighted by the likelihood of those returns occurring. Okay, so again, let's just say that there was in this case here, I'm just going to go probability 60% chance to get a return of 20%. Then we had a 40% chance to get a return of 10%. Okay, well, those are the probabilities. Okay, so then what's the expected return? Well, in our case, again, just looking at page 291, the expected return, I'm getting this right out of the textbook, okay, is the average of the possible returns weighted by the likelihood of those returns occurring. Okay, so let's how do we calculate this expected return? Okay, just because I need some room, I'm going to go down here and do it. Okay, so we'll have 60% times 20% return on investment plus 40% chance of a 10% return on investment. Okay, so what will happen there is, now where is my calculator? All right, so 60% times 0.2 or 20% is 12% total. Okay, and now here we have 0.4 times 0.1, and that's 0.04. We add those together, and we get an expected return. Now this is again based on average and probability, an expected return of 16%. Okay. So that's how we do that calculation. So again, why is it 16%? Well, let's look at it. There's a 60% chance that we're going to get a 20% return, and only a 40% chance that we're going to get 10. So it's got to be somewhere in the middle between 20% and 10%. More though towards the 20% return, because again, look at the weighting: 60%, 40%. Okay. Now, so we can, again, probability is the likelihood of the occurrence. The expected return, again, is the average, okay? Is the average of those possible returns, but it's weighted according to probability, okay? So if we look at this scenario here, what we just did, that's what we're gonna use for 10-1 and 10-2, okay? Now, the probability distribution, and that's on page 291, is the set of probabilities for all possible occurrences, okay? And we can see an example of that on page 292, okay? So if we go to the textbook, what does it say? It says here, for example, a 70-30 probability distribution for good or recession economic states suggests that the economy will be good in 7 of the next 10 years. So in the textbook's example, okay, there was a 70% chance of a good economy. Okay, 30% chance of poor economy. Now, I would have liked the authors to write this textbook in today's world. Okay, that's why some of this stuff I think now is completely irrelevant, just because we are in unprecedented times where no textbook author would have ever thought that we'd be selling barrels of oil for -dollars. Okay, so in this case here we have the oil producers are paying someone else to take away their barrels of oil just because there's no demand. Okay, so again, from the textbook, page 291, 70-30 distribution. So this is basically stating that, say we have 10 years. So 7 years are going to be good, 3 years are going to be not so good. Okay, and then we can factor that in with our expected returns. Okay, and then again, we will get what we're looking for. All right. Now we go to risk premiums. So just looking at some terminology now, just ignore this in this box here. I'm using that for intermediate accounting too. I just don't want to have to rewrite it out. Okay. But the questions that I'd like you to look at are 10-1, 10-2, 10-3, 10-4, 10-5, and 10-18. They're not very long, but it'll help you understand the concept. Now, let's look at risk premiums. Okay. So first of all, what is the required return? Well, that's the return an investors require for the risk level that they take. Okay. So if you invest in a government bond, it's going to be fairly low return, but there's not very much risk, okay? Because the government's not going to not pay out on those bonds. As we're seeing now, they're selling more and more and more, but they will not default on those bonds, okay? So from there, we got to look at a couple other topics or definitions. So we have here, again, our required return, which is the return an investor requires for the risk level that they take. Okay. So how do we calculate that? Well, we take our risk-free rate plus our return premium. Now, so we're going to have this information. So the so in this case here, okay, we have the risk-free rate is typically considered a return on a government bond. Okay, so Canadian government bond might pay 3%. Okay, so that's the risk-free rate because there's no risk in it. Okay, and this is just relating to that. Now, the premium, okay, is the reward investors that the risk premium is the reward investors require for taking that risk. Okay, so again, it really just depends on what that risk is going to be. Now, we don't know, okay, but let's just say we wanted a return of 10%. Okay, so our required return is 13%. Now, we know we can guarantee ourselves 3%, so we better go find out an investment that's going to return us 10%. That might be a little tough in today's day and age, but I mean, that's the gist of it, okay? So the risk premium is the portion of the required return that represents the reward for taking that risk, okay? So if we want a required return of 13%, okay, that's fine. We can go and get a government bond today for 3%, but we better find an investment that can make us, another 10%. So our total required return is 13%. Okay, again, this is on page 293. Now we go to the market risk premium, which is the return on the market portfolio minus the risk-free rate. Okay. Your risk-free rate might be baked in, so you've got to pull that out to see what you're really earning. So for example, if we look at a required return question in our textbook, okay, so I had assigned, 10.3? Well, let's just look at this together. So if the risk-free rate is 3% and the risk premium is 5%, what's your required return? Well, 5 plus 3 is 8. I mean, it's not that difficult, okay? So not much there, so we take our 3% plus our 5%. Okay. Obviously, that gets us 8%. Okay. So that's example of doing a required return calculation. Okay. Again, we see that the same type of question is on 10.4. So that was 10.3, 10.4. 10.5 is getting us to do a risk premium calculation. Okay, so if we're doing a risk premium calculation, okay, it's simply the average market risk premium that we're taking for that period. Okay, so the average annual return on the S&P 500 index from 86 to 95 was 18.5%, or no, 15.8%. The average T-bill yield was 5.6%. What was the market risk premium during those 10 years? Okay, well, it's a fairly simplistic calculation. Okay, let's look at it. The average annual return on the S&P 500 index, that's from New York, okay? Takes the top 500 companies on the stock market. They were saying that those companies would give you, if you invested in each one of those companies on average for that year, for that period, you would get a return of 15.8%. But let's just say you didn't want to take any risk at all. Okay, you're like, there's no way I'm going in the stock market. I'm going to invest strictly in government bonds. Well, those government bonds are going to get you, in this case, 5.6%. What's the market risk premium during those 10 years? Well, it's simply the return minus the risk-free rate, okay? So whatever 15.8 minus 5.6 gets us, that was your risk premium, okay? So again, something to consider. I really wonder right now how these corporate finance textbooks are going to be rewritten, because no one ever expected oil to be trading negatively. Like again, a barrel of oil yesterday was trading for minus $40 around 11 p.m. That's just insane. I mean, I still remember the days when oil was trading at, you know, over $100 a barrel. I think it was what, $120 a barrel. You know, and nowadays you can't get rid of it. Why? Well, because there's not enough demand. No one's flying. No one's traveling. We're just in a real crisis. Like I say, a lot of this stuff now, we're learning it, but I think it's drastically going to change. Okay. So again, that's it for today's corporate finance class. Read those pages that I've assigned. Okay. Try the questions. The questions aren't very difficult. Know the terminology. Okay, because that would be a multiple choice type question. Know how to do the quick calculations, and that's it for today's topic. Okay, so we'll see you tomorrow, and we'll figure out something else that we're going to talk about in this subject. Well, I guess it's figured out for us. We are going to talk about market risk, dealing with CAPM, known as the capital asset pricing model, beta, okay, your market portfolio, just a couple other concepts, and we'll go from there. I don't think chapter 10's that long, but we'll see where we end up tomorrow. All right.